This FedGov Today program is sponsored by EY. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the big three pieces of the handoff at the Transportation Department. Private sector solutions prepare for the public sector spotlight. And behind the scenes at a TMF transformation. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. A tighter cybersecurity infrastructure is one of the legacies the outgoing Chief Information Officer at the Transportation Department is leaving for his successor. That successor, when she or he is named, will see progress in two other top priorities, according to Cordell Schachter. He's the outgoing CIO at Transportation. Cordell, welcome. Thanks for joining. When you came into office at the Transportation Department, the effort to move to zero trust was in full effect at that point. What steps did you take at your department to bring to align the department with what the Biden administration went for in zero trust?
I think the important part of, or the context for zero trust was President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity issued in early 2001. And it laid out a very good roadmap, not only for federal agencies, but also government agencies and even private sector agencies to prioritize cybersecurity in their operations. Zero trust was mentioned there, but it wasn't as fully fleshed out as a plan. There was, though, lots we could do in the meanwhile and needed to be done. And it was great to have the support of Secretary Buttigieg, Deputy Secretary Trottenberg, and the political and career workforce of the Department of Transportation to make the Department of Transportation more cyber secure.
What's in place now regarding zero trust at the agency, and what work remains to be done to fulfill the spirit and the letter of the executive order?
Well, one thing that we did is to declare that cybersecurity is our priority. And I've said on a number of occasions, even though we have three priorities, if I could get away with it, our three priorities would be cyber, cyber, cyber. But obviously we need to look a little more expansive than that. But we've really focused on identity, and to think that identity is king or queen of the agency, and that's a central tenet of the zero trust framework as laid out by the White House. And communicating that message, I think, has been an important effort. And I believe it's well understood throughout the department.
This is probably a philosophical question more than a tactical question, but is there a point where zero trust becomes so synonymous with the idea of cybersecurity that it basically becomes what we think about as cybersecurity today, or will it always be kind of a component of that concept?
So where zero trust is very important, so that, and just to explain that for a second, is you get information that you need for the shortest amount of time that you need it. And it's not widely available. That's always been a practice, kind of a need-to-know basis, but we really didn't have the tools or the SOPs to make it so. The difficulty with any of these major initiatives is to prevent it from being productized. So if I buy product A, I'm good. So no matter what you buy, the implementation and the way that it's absorbed into the culture of any organization really determines whether you're secure or not. So I think whether it's called zero trust or something else, the principles of it will remain important. That need-to-know basis to get access to information is an important concept. It's been an important concept for a long time. And then to secure each of our identities so that we know that when Francis approaches the department, Francis is or not authorized, and then if authorized, he can just get information for what he truly needs to do his job.
All right, you said your priorities are not cyber, cyber, and cyber. The second one that you and I have talked about before is workforce development. Where is your workforce now? What skills are you doing well at, do you think, at Transportation, and what would you like to see your successor build up in the workforce at the department?
Thank you. So we've significantly reduced the number of vacancies in the IT workforce in the department. And given the amount of competition for that talent, it's a significant accomplishment. We're out there asking to hire many of the same roles as my counterparts are throughout the government and throughout the private sector. So to communicate how rewarding and important a job is at the Department of Transportation and in the Office of the Chief Information Officer, as well as our 9 other transportation modes, is a focus of our efforts and one that I hope my successor continues to advance.
What are the main areas of need right now, maybe not just in the Transportation Department, but broadly in your assessment across the government as you talk to your peers and colleagues in the CIO Council?
I think we need to continue to advance in the existing workforce while we are trying to recruit the best talent that's out there. No matter what job we have in IT, the one thing we know for sure is that we're not going to be doing the same job in 4 or 5 years. That we have to grow our skills, grow our own maturity, our little p political awareness. How do we influence the culture? Because there are challenges around the corner that none of us can see yet. But we need to train with the very latest skills and techniques and understandings so that we're ready to confront those challenges when they appear. I
like the phrase, challenges around the corner we can't see yet. Do you anticipate when some of those might be, or because they're around the corner and we can't see them yet, we don't know what to expect?
So that's a great question. And what I like to say is we need to develop the ability to see around those corners to better get ready for them. And I think one of those things that's around the corner is with AI, there will be increased automation among our adversaries. To meet that, we need increased automation among our defenses and tools. So we don't know exactly what those will be yet, but I think it requires us to get not only very sophisticated about the automation that's available now and to take advantage of it, but also to understand the capabilities of AI in the short run and what it can deliver for us and what it won't be ready to deliver for us and where we need to continue to invest in the workforce to be secure.
I think it's really insightful that you're thinking about the adversary or adversaries as the CIO of the Transportation Department, because I'm not sure a lot of people would think off the tops of their heads that that's something that you should be doing, and yet obviously transportation is one of the critical infrastructure components of the United States.
Exactly, and because of that, our adversaries are aware of that. And one thing that we all have to acknowledge is the rise of the nation state adversary over the last 3, 4, 5 years, who have much greater resource, who can deliver a greater bang for their buck, their disruption buck. So we need to be ready to confront that, as opposed to the single actor or hacktivist or e-criminal model that used to threaten us, still threaten us, but the nation-state actors have much greater resources to inflict greater damage.
We just have a couple of minutes left, Cordell. The third item on your priority list is IT system modernization. Where was that effort when you came in, and where does it stand today as you leave office?
DOT consolidated its common operating environment, as we call it, from separate operating environments among various transportation modes in DOT. In some ways, it's still that amalgam of what came before. There hasn't been additional investment to homogenize that or to look for solutions that we can replace multiple boxes or multiple systems with one or two. And we've really taken a look at that and have systematized the process of looking at the IT systems by ranking what systems have the greatest risk of being compromised from a cybersecurity perspective, putting that at the head of the list or the top of the list, along with low-hanging fruit, potentially of lower risk, but we can get those done quickly. So it's a pretty complex matrix as we assemble these things, just as we have a robust cyber appropriation that we can spend across the department. We've similarly asked for an IT system modernization appropriation that we can apply not just within the Office of the Secretary, but throughout the Department of Transportation, where the greatest risk and opportunity lives.
Cordell Schachter, thanks for your service. Thanks for joining me today. It's great to have you on the program.
My pleasure, Francis. Thanks for having me.
You can read more about transportation's tech plan on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, private sector solutions prepare for the public sector spotlight. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
It's true, and we're not about replacing people at all. It's a misnomer, when people think about information technology and automation. It's about enhancing the work that they do, right? Enabling them to be more effective and have the wherewithal to make their decisions day in and day out, having the data at their fingertips to do so, whether it be back at HQ or out in the field.
Welcome back. Leaders of the Department of Government Efficiency say they'll apply concepts that have been successful in the private sector to solving federal government challenges. They're the latest in a long line of people to advocate for private sector techniques to use in government. Jeff Bristow is Principal and Government and Public Sector Technology Leader for EY. Jeff, welcome. Thanks for joining me. You told me recently that you haven't seen any challenges that the federal government has that the private sector hasn't tried to address already. What's your sense of the differences between the way the private sector approaches those problems and the way the government does?
It's a great question. And I think twofold. One, it's almost a matter of when, not what. To some extent, a lot of the other sectors, if you think about it, they've already gone through a lot of these. So typically you see a lot more interest and kind of attitude around, let's take a chance, let's figure this out, let's embrace technology early on. So a lot of the concepts are already, they're going to be the same. There are definitely nuances of the government that have to be taken into account when you apply how to solve them. But the what is largely going to be the same. You talk about automation, you talk about artificial intelligence is what everyone wants to talk about right now. A lot of the underlying technology is going to be the same. How the agencies approach it, their willingness to approach it, is going to be maybe what's different, what needs to be figured out. So it's the technology is not in of itself what is going to make or break how you do it. It's really focusing on outcomes. I think that's something that I've seen a tremendous amount of acceptance and reliance now from agencies saying, let's not talk about my requirements, let's talk about what I want to do. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that's very, very common for private sector agencies to do, private sector entities, because they have motivations around profit, they have motivations around efficiency, and it drives the bottom line. While the federal government may not have that exact same bottom line, they do have very similar core beliefs and capabilities that they need to address. We're constituents. They want to improve outcomes for constituents. They want people to have a better experience. If you think about it, from banking to retail to hospitality, they all have a person at the center, right? As do every government agency. By definition, they're serving constituents. So it's really not about what technology do you use, it's about how do you apply that technology and what questions do you ask to make sure that you're solving the right problems.
So you mentioned hospitality. That's interesting to me because that's one of three private sectors that it strikes me people in the federal government talk all the time about, I want to know what's going on in that sector. Hospitality is one, financial services is another, and e-commerce is the third one that comes to mind right off the top of my head. What is driving that hunger, do you think, on the part of government people? Long before DOGE, long before the Biden administration's PMA about customer experience, long before the first Trump administration's PMA regarding services and CX, what's driven that hunger in your mind, and what does it look like today?
I think primarily it's the simple fact that every single constituent, whether they work for the government, whether they're supported by the government, they all have those experiences. So it's been technology has made that a lot more common now. So people say, I want an experience when I'm dealing with the government like this. So now if you look at my children, I have a 14-year-old, 11, and 8-year-old, right? My 8-year-old has very different expectations than I did when I was 8. In no small part because of technology and what the advancements that are now there. They just have a different fundamental experience, and they have an expectation around what they should be getting. So I think the goal of governments is, of agencies, let's try to figure out how to provide the same kind of experience. Let's create parity between what they do every day when they're not dealing with government and what they're getting from the government. And the closer they can get to that, the higher the utility they're going to get from the agencies that support them, higher customer experience, and ultimately it's going to improve the outcomes for those people, which helps everybody.
We have about a minute left. You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that the government obviously is different than the private sector. What do successful people in government do with private sector ideas to be successful when it comes to integration and implementation of it?
Excellent question. I think part of it, you have to recognize that it's not just about technology. There's a workforce component to this. You have to meet the agencies where they are. The agencies need to understand where they are, not just on the technology front, but also where are the people? Where are the employees right now who serve them? How can we help harmonize that, so you figure out how to adopt that most efficiently given where people are. So that's one big element of it. I think the other thing is just focus on outcomes. Again, and I've seen a huge evolution in my time supporting the government where people stop focusing on there's 3,000 requirements and now it's here are the outcomes I want to achieve, because that enables that enables people to leverage the technology to say, let's create a solution that doesn't replicate what you have today, but it addresses where you want to go tomorrow.
Jeff, thanks very much for joining us. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
You can read more on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, behind the scenes at a TMF transformation. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
If something were to happen in the Pacific, could we respond, could we strike in kind across all domains with all of our services in tangent with the full power of the US military? And I think most people are going to pause before they answer that question. And to me, that's where IT superiority comes back in. Because if you don't know the answer to that question, then you probably don't have the information you need to understand all the power you have at hand and how it works together. So a big piece of superiority and deterrence is visibility, consolidation. You know, my biggest piece of advice to the military would be to leverage the power that they have.
Welcome back. The Department of Education is one of the agencies praising the Technology Modernization Fund in the impact report former federal CIO Claire Martirana published before she left office last week. The department used the TMF to shore up its cybersecurity posture. Stephen Hernandez is the new Chief Information Security Officer and Deputy CIO at the U.S. Agency for International Development. He's the outgoing CISO at the Education Department and co-chair of the CISO Council. Stephen, welcome. It's great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Francis.
What did you use the TMF for when you were still at Education, and how did that fit with the three priorities that we'll talk about in a moment?
Sure. So there were three big areas that we focused on with the TMF, and the first was around making sure we had the agility to move at the speed of the mission. And this played out in a few ways. One, it played out in our technology solution choices, but it also played out in empowering and building an impressive program management office. The second space was around what we call security orchestration, automation, and response. And that's really about building almost the foundation of the brain for how zero trust is going to work and frankly move at the speed of the adversary. And then the third leg of that stool is around the secure service edge. And this is where we think about, as we expand the idea of what we need to protect and how we need to protect it, we foundationally also have to think about cognitively and from an architecture perspective, what does the edge now look like? And it's really interesting when we start to bring in ephemeral and elasticity to that conversation.
So I want to work those three backward, and I want to start with the edge, because for years federal government cybersecurity focused on a perimeter, an edge.
Yep.
And then almost immediately, maybe what, 8-10 years ago, people said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not defending the perimeter, we're defending the data. Now it sounds like we're kind of coming full circle back to the idea of the perimeter, but you use those two terms that you just used a moment ago before we went on the air too, ephemeral and elastic. What does that mean regarding the edge, the perimeter, and the way an agency should think about it today?
Yeah, a great analogy is to think back about the old days of defending a government building, a castle. We had a physical wall, we had a physical moat, we had a drawbridge to let the folks in and out when they met the criteria. And in many ways, we used to think about cybersecurity and network security in the same way. I got a physical router, I got a physical firewall, I have fiber and copper that my data flows over, and a lot of our security design and planning was almost based on that same mindset. And now we look at modern security, it's very different. We don't build castles and moats anymore. Why? Because the adversaries know it's very simple to overcome those actions. So when we think about elasticity, it's being able to understand that today what I consider my edge might be pretty small, but as I bring on new mission, as I bring on new devices, as I extend my mission capability, that edge also has to be able to grow and contract at the same time. And then when we think about the ephemeral nature of it, here again, I may have 10,000 devices that are part of my edge today, but are going to disappear tomorrow. And being able to work that into the agility conversation and being able to have the technology and the services that can support that type of agility, that's what Zero Trust is all about.
When you talk about securing the edge, do you talk about, does that term edge mean the same thing as it does to, say, someone in the Defense Department that is talking about security and computing at the edge, the way that it means the same thing to somebody in Homeland Security that's thinking about the edge? I'm not sure people would think the Education Department or USAID necessarily is forward, maybe aid, but maybe not the Education Department, forward deployed in the way that those organizations are. Does it mean the same thing?
It's nearly a perfect analogy because while we may not be talking about deployment of personnel or deployment of hard resources, what we are talking about is the deployment of our capabilities out into further reaches. And so, whether we're across the world or just operating within the United States, our area of operation can grow and contract, and part of that also involves, well, who are we dealing with as an adversary? Because that adversary could necessitate a shrinking of that edge, eliminate the opportunity for them to get in. It could encompass the growing of an edge. Hey, we have a new opportunity to give funding and aid out to more students, but to do that, we have to be able to reach different parts of the segment through different devices or different interfaces.
All right, you have a great acronym here with security, orchestration, automation, response. That comes out SOAR.
Yes.
But the word in there that I don't hear in the context of cybersecurity in the federal government very often is orchestration. Why is that significant to this concept of SOAR, Stephen?
Yeah, there's a reason it's in the front of that word, and that's because if we think about automation, let's talk about that first. Automation is, I've got a tool, like maybe even let's say I have an instrument, a piano. Automation would be putting that old reel in there with all the slots and getting it to turn and hitting the keys. That's automation. Orchestration is when you take a piano, a trombone, a xylophone, you have multiple services, multiple tools, and you have one orchestrator that is bringing it all together to create a phenomenal piece of music. That's the big distinction between orchestration and automation, and in Zero Trust, we have to be able to pull data from so many different sources. It's not all in one platform. It's not all in one type of endpoint. It's not all in one server or one service. It's a homogeneous environment in some cases, but most of the time we're dealing with a heterogeneous environment, and that's going to necessitate orchestration and our ability to affect change across that environment, whether it's network, application, device. Here again, none of those typically run on the same control interface. Orchestration is what brings that power to the front and says, even though you're a device, you're a service, we're going to treat you the same in terms of how we're changing our position for defense.
Okay, so regarding orchestration and all of those tools and devices that may be involved in that orchestration, I know you've told me in the past, you're trying to avoid the same thing that Cordell talked about trying to avoid at transportation, which is just fixing tools and assuming that putting a bunch of tools together is going to solve whatever your problem challenge is. How do you do so, and how does that concept of orchestration help you to do that, to get out of the buying something to fix something mode?
Yeah, there's a reason we call it an architecture versus a solution or a product when we talk about Zero Trust. And what the architecture says is that we're going to define very clear interfaces. We're going to define clear data structures. One of the most recent products we produced out of the CISO Council was our data security guide. That was a joint effort between the CDO Council and the CISOs to say, here's how we're thinking about data in this ecosystem. Because once we do that, product selection selection and who's in, who's out becomes much easier, because folks are either going to step up to the plate and they're going to play our game and they're going to meet our interface requirements, and we're going to be able to orchestrate them at speed, or they're not, and they're going to find themselves on the short list for either getting rolled out or just not being competitive anymore.
What is that collaboration like with the CTO Council and the other councils? I imagine it's getting tighter and tighter all the time.
Absolutely. So the CDO Council and the CISO Council coming together, that was like the first time that ever happened. And it was amazing because we had so many great perspectives. We probably could have had a few hundred pages of material, and we really had to pare it down to under 50. And what it really brought out was the power of bringing these different viewpoints together under the zero trust architecture. And what we got out of it was across government, and it's accessible to industry as well, a real step forward in saying, we've got a good handle on identity, we've got a good handle on a lot of the control. Let's tackle data next, and this is the first step in really moving in that direction.
Secure Service Edge, SOAR, and the third item is agility in cyber. We have less than a minute left. Yeah. Is agility as simple as it sounds?
You know, it really is. What really breaks down agility in the zero trust model are many of these pieces that we've just been talking about. If we don't plan around data and making sure data is consistent across the fabric, if we don't think about the devices, the users, the identities, the tools, the ephemeral nature of the edge, the elasticity of the edge, that's where we're going to lose folks, and that's where we lose agility, because we bring the network down. And then it's, well, turn that off and, you know, get back to it in 3 months. We have to be able to fire on all cylinders, and you have to have that program management leadership that's able to bring all the pieces together on the human orchestration front to really win.
I know that you have terrific program management leadership in your new role. Jason Gray, your former boss at Education, your new boss at USAID. It's great to have you on the program, Stephen. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Francis.
You can read more about cyber across government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment.
Those indicators that are keys of mission success, right? I mean, every mission has different objectives. Some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term missions. And it's really about evolving that so you're delivering for your stakeholders at large. And, you know, software is such a big part of what we do every piece of our lives today. And delivering quality software is important at speed and scale.
Welcome back. A series of new executive orders President Trump signed last week will impact the federal workforce in big ways. You can learn more about what they'll mean to you on the FedGov Today podcast this week. You can follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your shows so you don't miss an episode. And you can always listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.